Most of what we learn in school skips the messy, uncomfortable parts of the past. But here on Raw American History, we go straight into the stories that textbooks usually leave out. Today, we're talking about one of the strangest and most chilling political conspiracies in US history, when a group of Americans' most powerful businessmen allegedly tried to overthrow the President of the United States and replace him with a fascist dictator. Yeah, that actually happened. Or at least it almost did. This is the story of the business plot of 1933. Picture the United States in the early 1930s. The Great Depression wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. Banks were collapsing by the thousands, 1 in 4 Americans were out of work, farmers were losing their land, homeless families were setting up makeshift camps called Hoovervilles on the edges of cities. And into this chaos stepped Franklin Delano Roosevelt, elected in 1932 with a promise to fix the mess. Roosevelt's plan was bold: the New Deal. Massive public works projects, new banking regulations, government jobs programs, and for the first time, direct federal relief for ordinary Americans. To millions of struggling citizens, FDR was a hero. To the nation's business elite, he was a threat. The wealthy class, bankers, industrialists, Wall Street investors, they saw the New Deal as a direct attack on capitalism itself. Taxes on the rich went up, unions got stronger, the government was spending billions that it didn't have. In their minds, Roosevelt wasn't saving America, he was steering it towards socialism, or worse, communism. So some of them started whispering about doing something radical. Here's where things start to sound a bit like a political thriller. According to later testimony, a network of wealthy businessmen and Wall Street interests began discussing plans to remove Roosevelt from power. Not by assassination, but by a coup. Their goal was to create a parallel government, a sort of extra-constitutional authority led by a respected military figure who could supposedly restore order and stop the New Deal. In other words, they wanted an American dictator, and they already had someone in mind to lead it. His name was Major General Smedley Butler. If you've never heard of him, Butler was one of the most famous soldiers in the country at the time. He had served in the Marines for 33 years, fought in multiple wars, and won not 1, but 2 Medals of Honor. He was tough, patriotic, and wildly popular amongst veterans, the perfect man to rally a movement. And that's exactly what made him dangerous to the people plotting the coup. They thought Butler could give them legitimacy. He was the kind of man that ordinary Americans trusted, so they approached him. And in the summer of 1933, Butler was visited by several businessmen who claimed to represent a large group of wealthy backers. They told him that the country was in chaos, that Roosevelt's health was failing, and that soon someone would need to save the nation. They said a veterans organization, modeled after Italy's fascist black shirts, could be formed, hundreds of thousands strong. It would march on Washington, pressure Roosevelt to hand over executive powers, and then install Butler as a sort of Secretary of General Affairs, a role that would quietly make him the real ruler of the country. I know, sounds crazy, but it gets better. They told Butler he wouldn't even have to worry about money because Wall Street was behind him. They claimed $3 million was ready to fund the operation, with more to come. They even name-dropped the DuPont family, executives from General Motors, Goodyear, JP Morgan interests, and Remington Arms. But Smedley Butler wasn't buying it. He listened, he played along, he even met more of their representatives to gather information. But deep down, he thought the whole thing smelled rotten. And remember, this was a man who had spent decades serving the military-industrial machine. He knew how power worked. He'd seen corporations and banks profit from war while ordinary soldiers died. So instead of joining their plan, Butler turned them in. In November 1934, Butler went before Congress, specifically a committee called the McCormick-Dickstein Committee, which was investigating Nazi propaganda and subversive activities in the US. Under oath, Butler told everything. He named names, he described meetings, letters, money offers, and the entire plan to use veterans as a private army to overthrow Roosevelt. He said the conspirators believed he'd be easily manipulated, that once he took control, he'd hand back power to them, the financiers. But Butler wasn't the type to be manipulated. He told the committee bluntly, "They thought I would become dictator. I told them that if I were to become dictator, I'd be the one running things, not them." The hearings made national headlines for a while. Wall Street plot to seize the government. You know, that kind of thing. But almost immediately, something strange happened. The story faded. The committee confirmed that Butler's testimony was credible and that there were verifiable connections between the alleged plotters and major business interests. But the government quietly shut the whole thing down. No one was charged, no one went to prison, the media simply moved on, and the businessmen that Butler accused, including people tied to DuPont and JP Morgan, continued living their lives untouched. So what really happened? Was the business plot a real coup attempt, or was it exaggerated? Well, historians still debate that. Some think Butler may have misunderstood, that the businessmen he spoke with were just angry anti-Roosevelt types talking big over cigars. But others point out that in the early 1930s, fascism was rising all over the world. Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, authoritarian movements in Spain and France. Plenty of American elites openly admired those systems. They saw fascism as a strong alternative to messy democracy and strikes and taxes. And if you look at the timing, it lined up with just how scared the upper class was. In 1933, Roosevelt was barely into his first term, and the New Deal was just beginning to reshape the economy. Unemployment was sky high, people were desperate. In that kind of environment, it doesn't sound all that impossible that a group of panicked millionaires might want a general to take charge. Smedley Butler didn't stop talking after the hearings, though. He went on a public speaking tour, warning Americans about what he called war profiteers and the corporate control of government. He even wrote a short book called War is a Racket, where he admitted that during his career he'd been, in his own words, a high-class muscle man for big business. He ended up dying just a few years later, in 1940, but his reputation only grew. Today, he's remembered as one of the few military men of his rank who openly turned against the forces of money and power that had used him. As for the business plot, it became one of those half-forgotten stories that slipped through the cracks of history. It's not in most textbooks, it's not in patriotic documentaries. But think about it. The idea that some of America's richest and most powerful figures might have plotted a fascist-style coup isn't exactly the kind of story that high school history wants to tell. Yet, it fits perfectly with the climate of fear and inequality that defined the 1930s. Millions starving while a handful of tycoons still lived in luxury, a populist president trying to redistribute wealth, and a ruling class so scared of losing control that some of them considered breaking democracy itself to keep it. In the end, the coup never happened. But the mindset behind it, that mix of fear, greed, and entitlement, it never really went away. It shows up again and again throughout American history whenever power feels threatened. And maybe that's why the story of the business plot matters so much today. It's not just a weird historical footnote, it's a warning about just how fragile democracy can be and how easily it can be undermined, not just by mobs or foreign enemies, but by the people sitting in the boardrooms. The past isn't always clean, and it definitely isn't simple. But the more we uncover about these forgotten stories, the more we see history for what it really was: raw, human, and complicated. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, be sure to hit that like button, drop a comment down below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more episodes of Raw American History. Because history isn't always clean, it's raw.